Time now for another vlog. And if you have a vlog suggestion that I've yet to do, be sure and check the vlog playlist first. Then send your vlogs my way via the comment section, Twitter, Facebook, or Discord. All the links to Go Burns Nation below in the description section. And speaking of Discord, today's suggestion comes from Kane. He wants me to vlog about change. That's one thing that comes to my mind when it comes to vlog suggestions. Change is like a battle that some want. Others try sometimes in foolish attempts to prevent change. History has told the story more times than anyone can remember. Deep thoughts with Kane. Alright, so today we're vlogging about change. And change is happening every day in our lives, quite literally. All you gotta do is keep an eye on the time, and you will see change. From the sun rising to the east, setting in the west, to the moon coming out at night, and then the whole cycle repeating again. That is change, as well as weather patterns. Some day it's nice and sunny. Some days it's raining and storming and knocking over your recycling bin, so you have to clean up all the recyclables off your front lawn like I did a few minutes ago. I didn't realize it was going to storm as bad as it did, okay? I just anticipated like a mild shower at best, because we really haven't gotten much rain. It's been a scorcher down where I live, so I was not prepared for such a dramatic change so quickly. In other words, I should have waited a little while to put my recycling bin down on the curb, but anyways, just like Kane says, some people are not prepared for change. Other people embrace change. And change happens throughout our entire lives. From the moment we're born, we change from one existence to the next, from being inside a womb for 9 months or 8 or 9 months, depending on how long you were in there, to every day changing just a little bit more. You go from being a helpless infant to learning to feed, to learning to crawl, to making noises in order to get your parents' attention. And you go from crawling to standing up. And then you go from noises to actually saying words, even if it's like mama, dada, feed me, now. Yeah. So changes happen, and you go from just standing or trying to stand to walking to running. And there you go. Change is happening throughout our lives. You have some teeth. Your premature teeth fall out, then new teeth grow back in. Your adult teeth. You grow, you get taller, hopefully. You start becoming an adult, as they say. And eventually, yeah, you're an adult. You're a fully fledged adult, not just according to the law, but naturally, you are an adult. You have transformed. You have changed like a butterfly. From a cocoon, from a caterpillar, into a beautiful butterfly. And you're now an adult. But the change continues as you get older and older. Like, it happens in various degrees, and for some people, the change is more dramatic than others. Some people gain weight because they don't exercise enough, or it could be due to genes. Maybe when they were younger, they had a very good metabolism, but as they get older, that metabolism slows down, or they make some terrible decisions, like eating bad food, or alcohol, or other abuses that result in them getting out of shape. And that's also a change. So not all change is good. There's definitely a lot of bad change that happens in our lives. But things do change. Nothing ever truly stays the same. And so you go from being in your early 20s to your 30s to your 40s. And somewhere along the way, you're going to notice other physical changes, even if you are healthy, even if you do take care of yourself. A lot of it does depend on your genes. Like, some people start to lose their hair at various ages. Some at an early age. I've known a few people in their 20s that started losing their hair. And for those that don't lose their hair, those lucky few of us that have yet to lose our hair, eventually, you start to see gray hairs pop up here and there. And unless you're all about, trying to fight that change with hair dye, changing your hair color to a fake color, in order to give the illusion that you're still a natural blonde or brunette or whatever hair color your heart desires you to have, naturally, your hair will change color. For example, my baby sister, who's a dentist, she claims that her hair is gray now, or at least a lot more gray than it should be, but she dyes her hair on a regular basis, so we really don't know the truth. I mean, she's only in her late 20s. I think she's actually going to be 30 this year, but she's a dentist. Her husband's a dentist, so obviously had to go through a lot of school, a lot of hard studying. At the top of her class in high school, she was the captain of the cheerleading squad, president of the student council, president of her sorority in college. She was also president of her class at, dental school. I think her husband was vice president, so they've known each other since then. That's where they met. And, he has a little bit of gray hair now. He has a little bit of gray hair. But that's probably because of all the stress, all the years of hard work and studying, getting to that point. Then eventually they become dentists, and then they decide to go from a change to being simply dentists to starting their own business. And that's not easy either, because you have to go out and get loans. And loans are not cheap, and everything hinges on the success of your business. So change is happening every day in our lives. And once again, I really don't know if my sister's exaggerating when it comes to her hair actually being gray. Maybe. There might be a few natural gray hairs that have popped up here and there, but I think she just likes to exaggerate. But that's my sister for you. But one thing that hasn't really changed about, I guess, my feelings is I still love my sisters very much. Even though I've seen them change. It's very interesting that we were just talking about how people go from that change, from being babies to toddlers to little children to teenagers and adults. And I've bear witness to that change, because I was 5 or 6 years old, I think, when they were born. Actually, I think I was older than that, because, all right, so if my youngest is turning 30 this year, that means I'm 7, 8 years older than her. Yeah. But see, I was at an age where, even though I was still a kid, I still remember when my 2 youngest sisters were born. And there's still that memory, right? I still remember them as infants in diapers and helpless and full of wonder in their eyes and not knowing what awaits them in their future. So over the past nearly 30 years, well, I guess you could say 30 years of my life, I have seen the change in their lives. I've seen them grow up. I've seen the mistakes they've made. I've seen the times when they were BFFs. They were best of pals. I've seen the time when those two wouldn't even talk to each other. And fortunately, they're back to being BFFs again. But anyways, change does happen to everybody. It happens to you. It happens to people around you. It happens to the world we live in, such as weather cycles. We just talked about that a moment ago. Currently in the northern hemisphere, it's the summer. I believe in the southern hemisphere, it's winter. And hopefully the sooner the fall gets here, the better. That's one change I'm very much looking forward to, because I hate summers. And it's been, like I mentioned a moment ago, with the exception of, say, Sunday afternoon, when I recorded this vlog, that shower we got in storm that knocked over my recycling bin, it's been pretty hot. Been a scorcher. And unfortunately, August isn't even here yet. And August is usually the worst time of the year when it comes to the summer. It's usually at its peak. Well, and then, like, once we get to September, it starts to begin slowly getting cooler. We at least get teased with cooler weather, but it's still hot. But then, hopefully, by the time October gets here, we'll be heading towards fall weather. At least I hope that's the case. So that's definitely, like I said, change that I'm very much excited for, looking forward to. Please, I just want it to get cooler. But there are definitely people that fight change, just like Kane was talking about in his suggestion. And you've seen it throughout history, unfortunately. You've seen it in recent American history with desegregation, the civil rights movement. You had, unfortunately, those out there, for whatever rhyme or reason, I guess you could just simply say that there were intolerant, racist pieces of shit that saw themselves as superior to everybody else, against the idea that we were all equal. The whole notion of separate but equal is a bunch of nonsense, in my opinion, because how can you be equal if you're separate? So eventually that change happened across the United States, and unfortunately it wasn't a smooth change either. It was pretty bloody, and a lot of people unfortunately paid the ultimate price for that movement, like Martin Luther King Jr., for example. But eventually change did occur. We got desegregation, there is more equality in my country, even though it's not 100% equality. I feel like in some cases we're closer to the ideas and principles of freedom and liberty in the U.S. In other cases, I feel like we have a long ways to go. But if you look at it from, I guess, a long-term point of view, yeah, things are a lot better in 2018 than they were, say, nearly 200 years ago at the founding of the Republic in, what was it? Well, the Constitution was, 1787. It was ratified a year later. Then the Bill of Rights came along in 1791. Then George Washington became our first president. Unfortunately, despite the fact we were a republic back then, we also had issues at the dawning of our republic. For example, slavery, a big issue. Inequality when it came to women. Women did not have equal rights to men. They did not have voting rights. That came along later with women's suffrage. The way that Native Americans were treated was atrocious. A horrible blight on American history. One of many. It's not all roses. I don't run around as an American with rose-colored glasses. I recognize the good things, and I also recognize the bad things. So there's definitely been change in American history. But I feel like at its core, if you go by the ideals of America, freedom and liberty and equality and justice for all, that was always something I think we were striving towards. I don't think we definitely didn't come anywhere near to reaching that goal at the beginning. I think it was like you were at the starting line right there, right? You were at the starting line, and you were just starting that race right there. Boom. I guess the shots fired that indicated the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. That's a change. It was a change that the United Kingdom was not willing to embrace, right? King George III in Parliament, because of the fact they were in massive amounts of debt. And I'm sorry, Kane. I know you're British. And he knows this too because he's into history. And I think we talked about this the other day. But because of the fact that the British Empire was in a massive amount of debt, because they were spread across the world, as they once said, the sun never set on the British Empire. And after the American Indian Wars, the French Indian Wars, England was in debt. And so they had to find ways to pay off that debt, so they started taxing the colonists in the 13 colonies. And of course, the colonists were not too happy about that. They protested, they petitioned. Unfortunately, it seemed like Parliament wouldn't listen, so the protests got worse. They started resisting. They started having tea parties in Boston. There was a massacre in Boston, even only a few people were killed. And some people say it was actually one of the protesters that may have started that by attacking one of the soldiers. I don't know. It's really depending on your point of view on that subject. But anyways, so a lot of that sparked the American Revolution. And it was a change that the United Kingdom was not prepared for. And unfortunately, it was a change that transformed a lot of the world, because after the American Revolution, you had the fall of France, because France was now in bankrupt because of supporting the American Revolution against the UK. And that led to the horrors of France, the revolution there, which was far worse because everyone was being guillotined left and right. First the king and queen, and then eventually you saw the rise of Napoleon as emperor of France. So that led a lot of change, and the monarchs feared the change naturally, so they allied and banded together against Napoleon. Eventually Napoleon was defeated in Russia. He was exiled, then he came out of exile, he tried to start the whole thing over again, then he was stopped at Waterloo. So yeah, there's some history for me, right? But yeah, change is a constant in our world, and there's good change that definitely happens as well as bad change. And from a more personal level, you have to be willing to accept the change in your life, because every day something different is happening. Even if you wake up one day to the next day and so on, you don't really feel like much change is happening. Every day you're learning something else, whether it's a small thing or a big thing about life, lessons. I always have this running joke that I learned something new today. Well, I guess I learned something new today, or I learned something new this week. And every time you learn something, it adds just a little bit more change to you, because you start to, I guess, transform from the person that you are now into the person you're going to be tomorrow or next week or next month or next year. I would say that there are some similarities with who I am now as opposed to who I was a year ago in 2017. Okay, it's 2018 right now, yeah. But then there's a lot of differences between who I am now in 2018 than who I was in 2008 or who I was in 1998. So, yeah, I've gone through a lot of changes in my life personally, not just philosophically with politics, as I've mentioned a few times, trying not to get political, but it's just a point about the change and how we have to be willing to embrace change. Because a lot of times when you're growing up, your parents are trying to do the best they can, right? And a lot of people grow up believing what their parents believe, whether it's religious or political. And either A, you're going to accept some of the things your parents believe or everything your parents believe, or B, you're going to start to question some of the things your parents believe. And you're going to start looking for answers on your own to form new ideas and thoughts and opinions based on what you think. And so whenever I was in my teens, my grandfather was conservative. He still is conservative, by the way. And so I was, I guess you could say more conservative in my teens because of my grandfather. But as I, became an adult and I got out in radio and I started making friends with different points of view, and I started to become more aware of the world around me, realizing that it was a lot more complicated than, this side is good, this side is bad. I started realizing that, while I may have still had some conservative points of view on things, I wasn't 100% conservative. And then eventually I became a libertarian. And eventually I went from being a libertarian to being somewhere in the middle, more of a moderate or a centrist, because I got tired of seeing the division between right and left in this country. And it seems to get worse and worse because both sides at their extremes refuse any sort of change, any sort of compromise, even remotely trying to come meet in the middle in order for change to happen. So as long as you have the left and the right in my country and possibly other countries refusing to work together and making the divide even worse, it's making the change more difficult to happen when there needs to be change. And that's a big issue I have right now, is the fact that we seriously need some change in this country. And it's obvious because people are tired of the political process in my country. They see corruption from both sides, from both major parties. And 2016 was one of the worst presidential elections because the majority of Americans didn't like either of the front runners. So they were having to vote for one they liked a little more, or they disliked the least. And either way, it was going to lead to disaster. And I don't really care who would have been president. I think that we were screwed either way. As I've pointed out in the past, I believed in the old slogan from the movie Alien vs. Predator, whoever wins, we lose. That's how I feel right now. Or like from the original Ghostbusters, you have Gozer, telling the Ghostbusters, choose the form of the Destructor. Basically, that's what the 2016 election was Gozer telling the American people, choose the form of your Destructor. Unfortunately, we didn't have the option of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. So yeah, change can be difficult sometimes because it can make you take a hard look in the mirror and ask difficult questions about yourself. Like, who am I really? What do I believe? What am I really into? And especially if you were raised to believe you were something else by your parents. Now, they may believe what they believe in, and maybe they can never change because that's what they've come to believe. Doesn't matter if it's political, religious, etc. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to agree 100% with your parents. There will come a time, and this happened to me on numerous occasions, not just politically, but other ways as well, where I had to come to accept certain changes about me, about how I was different than the way people wanted me to be. And sometimes it was difficult. Sometimes it was very difficult, especially when you live in a religious area like I live in the South. It's very difficult, especially when your family is religious, whether it's Catholic or Protestant, and I happen to have both in my family. And so that was difficult, even though I don't really go out talking about what I believe or don't believe or my lifestyle choices. I had to come to terms with who I am, and I still am every day. Every day I wake up and I'm attempting to figure out who I'm meant to be. So I embrace change. I embrace the fact that I'm meant to be who I'm meant to be, whatever the case may be. Hopefully, I'm also meant to be a good person, and I try to be a good person. I try to do right by other people. I've made mistakes. I've zigged when I should have zagged. Plenty of times when I was younger, and I still make mistakes occasionally. I've learned from my mistakes. Hopefully, I've got some wisdom. I know we've talked about that in previous vlogs, and that's one thing about change. If you learn to embrace change, then I do think it makes you wiser. I do think it makes you become that person you were meant to be. And today you may think, oh, I've got it all figured out. I know exactly who I am. I know exactly what I want to be. I know exactly what I'm all about. But then tomorrow something comes up and it completely like catches you flat-footed. And you're like, well, wait a minute. That just made me question what I once believed. That can happen too. And that's the way of change. You know, you start off, I guess, as eggs, so you become a caterpillar. And then eventually you, if you allow it to happen, you will transform into a butterfly. Change is not something to fear. Do not fear change, because change comes to us all, eventually. And sadly, that's just life. Life is change. We're born, we grow up, and eventually we get older. And if you're lucky enough to live a full life, eventually you will die. Just like every other being on this planet that has come before us. Now, does that necessarily mean that that's the end of the journey? I don't know. Maybe it's a change from this life to the next. Maybe there is truth to all the beliefs in the world. Maybe those are simply streams that flow into the same river. I've talked about that as well. I don't know which one's the truth. That's the problem. Maybe they all are. Maybe none of them are. Maybe they each got a little something. They're each a piece to the puzzle. Maybe we don't have the answers to any of that. Maybe, just maybe, none of it's the truth. Maybe it just all goes dark when it's over. But for some reason, for thousands of years, we have been ingrained to believe in something beyond this life. A change from the flesh and the bone that makes us here to something more spiritual, to another realm, whether it's heaven, hell, Valhalla, purgatory, nirvana, the fifth dimension, wherever we're meant to go in the next life, if there is in fact the next life. Whatever the case may be, I embrace that change. I embrace all change. I want the world to change into a better place. I don't want it to change into a worse place, because that can also transition as well. A cycle. Just like one day it could be nice and sunny and beautiful outside, the next day it can be dark and cloudy and stormy and monsooning, and you could have tornadoes and earthquakes and volcanoes going off. But eventually all that does reside, because it's a cycle. It's all part of the change that is our world and that we're part of, for better or worse. So you can either do one or two things, just like Cain said at the beginning. You can either embrace the change in order to realize who you were meant to be and embrace that person and be happier for it in the long run and fulfill whatever your destiny happens to be while we're still on this beautiful blue world for whatever time we're allowed to be here. Or you can fight that change. The choice is up to you. Are you going to allow yourself to go into that cocoon and, learn what you need to learn, embrace the changes necessary in order for you to eventually come out of the cocoon and become a beautiful butterfly? Or are you just going to putter around for the rest of your life saying, I don't want to be a butterfly, I'm perfectly happy staying on the ground, being an ugly looking caterpillar. Yes. I had a brain fart there. So the choice is yours. Do you want to be a caterpillar for all your life and just reduce yourself to that, only ever being a caterpillar and eventually being eaten by a bird or ran over or stepped on? Or you willing to accept that change, that embrace, that thing that is going to happen anyways, without fighting it, without resisting it, opening your mind and your heart and your soul to change, that's going to allow you to eventually transform into that beautiful butterfly you're meant to be. And if you do, eventually you're going to end up soaring way above all your fellow caterpillars.